Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Education Technology Panel discussion at the 2016 Education Summit. My name is Paul Escobar, and I am the Senior Associate for Policy and Foundation Programs at the Leadership Group. Education Technology is one of the four specialization areas in the education portfolio at the Leadership Group. I want to thank very quickly Adobe for sponsoring this panel. And now I would like to introduce Barbara Means, the co-director for the Center of Technology and Learning at SRI International. Barbara will be the moderators. Barbara will moderate today's panel, on building sustainable public-private partnerships in order to further advance the successful integration of technology in the classroom as a strategy to enhance student learning outcomes. She, in addition to being the co-director for the Center for Technology and Learning, it has research that focuses on ways that technology can support students' learning of advanced skills and the revitalization of classrooms and schools. Currently, she is directing the evaluation of the Next Generation Courseware Initiative of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She is also the principal investigator for a project developing a system of indicators of the quality of K-12 STEM education for the National Science Foundation. I will now pass it to Barbara.
Thank you very much, Paul. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. And in the front, excellent. Okay, always. Oh, you can't? It is on. Okay. Can you hear that now? Is that better? A little better. Really? Okay. Okay. Oh, we'll close the door. It'll probably be better. Okay. Hopefully so. Well, I want to welcome you all to today's panel. We have representatives here from a couple of really interesting public-private partnerships in the education space and the learning technology space, and you're going to hear from them. First, I'd like to introduce Diane Tavener, the founder and CEO of Summit Public Schools, the charter management organization. She also serves as board chair of the California Charter Schools Association, which contains most of the 1,300 some charter schools in the state of California. Mike Segal, sitting next to her, is the Director of Engineering at Facebook. He leads the K-12 education team, which is working in partnership with Summit Public Schools. He studied computer science at Stanford with a focus on human-computer interaction. They've been partnering, working to scale the personalized learning system originally developed at Summit, and making the improved system available to schools across the country for free. Next, a familiar face for many of you, Mohammed Chaudhry is the president and CEO of the Silicon Valley Education Foundation. Under his stewardship, the foundation's become the leading education not-for-profit resource, preparing students for college and careers in Silicon Valley. It's dedicated to elevating scholastic achievement in the Valley, and especially in the critical area of STEM. Mark Sweden, to my left, is a partner and tech sector leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers, also known as PwC. He's in the merger and acquisitions advisory practice. He's an advocate of community service and regularly volunteers for youth education. He's also on the advisory board of the Silicon Valley Education Foundation and has been working with their EdTech innovation initiatives. Kathy Gomez is the superintendent of the Evergreen School District. She's co-chair of the East Side Alliance. She serves on the Project Cornerstone Advisory Board and on the iHub Innovation Advisory Board. The Learning Innovation Hub, or iHub, of Silicon Valley Education Foundation you'll be hearing about, connects education technology entrepreneurs, educators, and researchers to facilitate collaboration and product feedback for optimal decisions about integrating technology tools into our classrooms. In partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers, iHub has been providing free EdTech assessments to school districts in the Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. So Evergreen is one of the most engaged district partners in this effort, and we'll really hear from Kathy about what that looks like and feels like. You can find extended bios of all of the panelists and myself if you use the QR code at the bottom of your agenda. So with that, I will dig right into some of the questions. And I want to ask all of the panelists or whoever wants to jump in here, what you see in terms of impact as technology is becoming more ubiquitous in classroom and schools. What do you think is happening in terms of student engagement, in terms of performance, achievement, or other changes you see happening in classrooms? So maybe we'll mix this up a little bit. Somebody who didn't reply the last hour might start us off.
Go for it.
Okay, well, I'm going to say what Mohammed said earlier, and that is technology does have an impact. Technology is available. Technology is a tool, and the big change that we are attempting to make is to change the mindset of the classroom teacher and maybe the public as well as to what good classroom instruction looks like. Because if you walk into any classroom today, it's going to look very much like it looked when you were in school or when your parents were in school. That hasn't changed very much. So our effort, and particularly my effort from the superintendent perspective, is to set the conditions where that change can happen. People can begin to think differently about what good teaching and learning looks like.
And that begs the question of, what does it look like? Someone want to jump in on that? Do you want to?
That's not what you were expecting, but I'm happy to take that one. So from our perspective, it goes beyond the classroom. I think it's the whole learning environment. And really, I think the big shift, if you're going to sum it up in a sentence, is it goes from an environment that is really about adults, controlled by adults, driven by adults, run by adults, to one that is about the student and puts the student at the center and empowers the student to own and drive their own learning. And when you make that flip, literally everything has to change. Everything about the institution, the organization, and what the school environment looks like.
Do you see that happening very much?
So I'll start
No.
off by why this should be happening, and then I'll get into is it happening. The why it should be happening is so that they could do more problem solving. They could work in a more collaborative way. We all hear notions of personalized learning in the classroom of one. What does that really mean? Or the flipped classroom? So, I mean, it's about delivering all those concepts. It's basically not delivering a one-size-fits-all instruction for 30 people in the room, but rather adapting the instruction to the different people in the room and also flipping it. Listening to instruction doesn't need to happen anymore in the classroom. In the classroom, you learn to work with other people and problem solve. So really, we're drastically changing the velocity of learning and also giving new skills to our students. That's what's needed in a knowledge-based economy and what is expected from students graduating. Now, there was one word in your question, which is the ubiquity of technology in the classroom. Technology is ubiquitous in society these days and is ubiquitous in the workforce. It is not ubiquitous in the classroom, and in fact, there's a huge lag. And the lag has been catching up a lot in the past 3 years, right? But I would say, I mean, this should have started 20 years ago. and so now we're trying to catch up, and I'd say with these new concepts coming into place, it's great because we're trying to leapfrog it. But this is not something that will be solved overnight.
Right. Mohammed, from your standpoint, working with a lot of school districts, a lot of schools, how much do you think this access problem within classrooms, that we're really tackling that, or do you still see dramatic lack of access and lack of equality in access? And how much do you see this change we're talking about to more student-centered learning models? So that is, kind of give us a quick state of Silicon Valley.
So, Salesforce is one of the sponsors here. So, customer relationship management. I absolutely agree with Diane. The customer here is the student, and how do you make that the center of the universe, and how do you connect all the dots? And to think about Silicon Valley, I would say if you think from San Francisco to Gilroy, there's about 450,000 kids, which is about half the size of New York. I mean, it's a pretty large population. It's also in 52 school districts, and they're autonomous, they're independent, and that's the way the Valley works. So each one of those districts are at a different stage of that. And even within those districts, technology is at different stages. The way I like to describe Silicon Valley is there's two Silicon Valleys. There's one up 280 that has all the riches in the world, and then you've got the one up 101 where it looks like anywhere else in the world in terms of need. There are still schools in Silicon Valley, right, where home of Facebook and lots of great companies where a 30 students watching video will crash the wireless infrastructure. So how do you, so there isn't a standardized rollout. There is technology in the classroom, but I think what we're happening now is with the Common Core implementation, that there was a large emphasis on technology because of testing, and we just had good data come out yesterday on the SBACs. But I think what we're seeing is the conversation has moved beyond, am I a Mac school or a PC school? I mean, that conversation's done, thank God. So now hardware is not our challenge anymore. It's what do you do with that hardware to what everyone said is to increase student achievement. And the leaders, at least in these 52 school districts, and a lot of the leadership, they're at least thinking about that problem. And then they're at different stages of it, but it's now top of mind because the testing, adaptive testing is happening. There's a lot of conditions that have changed that are forcing that, but now it is top of mind. So I think we're at an inflection point where we will really see the adoption happening.
So you see that there really is a deeper consideration of what this could mean for the change in the way we do education and student learning happens. And let's take a look at one of these partnerships, talking to the Summit Public Schools and Facebook folks with their work in personalized learning and education technology. I wonder if Diane could tell us a little bit about what Summit was doing before they started partnering with Facebook and what led them to look for a technology partner.
Great. So when we launched Summit 15 years ago, we had a basic mission and premise, which was how do we redesign the public high school in America to be more responsive and reflective of what we want now in our modern world? And then how do we leverage that for broader impact? And we spent about the first 10 years doing that, creating a model. And by most standards of success, we're incredibly successful at that. And we got to a point, though, where we internally looked at that success, which is really driven by our kids getting accepted to and going to college and earning four-year degrees, and saying, you know what, we're double the national average on kids earning four-year degrees, and we're not satisfied with what this means. We still don't think it's necessarily reflective of what we need in the world. And we're doing this in a charter organization that's small and has all these advantages. And so not feeling like this is going to scale to the rest of the system. And so it was at that point that we really took a big step back and said we need to relook at everything we're doing. And this is where our focus on shifting from adults to students at the center began. We've been on a 5-year journey since, literally learning how to become an organization that goes back and does continuous improvement and iteration and hypothesis-driven, building and design of models. And in the process, found that you have to use technology if you're going to do this type of work, and tried to build some internal capacity that got us so far on that. But literally at one point, came to the end of what we could do internally as a school organization with one engineer. And fortunately at that point, because of our proximity and where we are, had the opportunity to connect with Facebook and Mark directly, who said, seems like you need engineers and that's what we have. Maybe we should partner. And so indeed we did. And that partnership is allowing us to not only continue to push the boundaries of what we're designing and developing for kids, but to share it incredibly broadly. And so, just this year we're working in 27 states with 130 schools and 20,000 students. We trained 1,500 teachers this summer collectively that we're supporting and engaging with and partnering with to spread what we're doing.
That's great. Mike, from your standpoint, and I doubt that you can read Mark Zuckerberg's mind directly, but most people don't think of.
So
That's true. Maybe you can. Most people wouldn't have thought of Facebook, as certainly not 3 years ago, as an education technology company. They would have thought of it as a technology company, but not an education technology company. How do you think, what made Facebook decide that this was an important partnership to really, devote the time of you and your team? And what do you bring to the partnership, being new to personalized learning?
Well, it's true, as you say, Facebook was not working on education prior to this partnership. And it really speaks to how inspired Mark was when he saw the learning environment that he witnessed in Summit Public Schools, and the idea of shifting the focus to be student-centered, to really help support the needs of every individual, and how technology can be a tool that helps to enable that shift. If you're referencing the traditional classroom and the teacher setting the pace and the path for every student, where you could have a sense that this student is pretty advanced and this student has some catching up to do, but I'm going to have to teach everyone at the same time and therefore teach to the middle. You're not really delivering that personal experience that meets the individual needs and interests, and acknowledging that in the world we live in, there's not just one path that everyone is moving towards, but everyone is going to be able to carve their own individual future for themselves. And based on their career ambitions and their interests, we want to be able to support all of those different jagged profiles. And this concept of individuality, which is expressed very well in the book The End of Average by Todd Rose, is very connected to a lot of the thinking that Mark and Diane share around how we can support this personalized experience. So, getting back to where Facebook's strengths are, it's true, Facebook as a technology company, I think has two real key strengths. One is building solutions for scale and having the support and the infrastructure for software that can be used by millions and billions of people. And the second is building with empathy. You're not going to be able to build something that can be used by 1.7 billion people around the world and have a one-size-fits-all solution. You have to understand each individual's interests and needs and how they're going to find value in the tools that you're building. And so I think how this connects to Facebook's broader mission, Facebook aims to make the world more open and connected, and the purpose of those connections aren't just getting online, but it's how those connections can help improve your life. So all of us here know that education is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful forces for helping people achieve their full potential. And when you look at Facebook's strengths and our overarching mission and connect that to the systems and ideas behind individuals achieving their full potential that Summit is really focused on enabling and supporting, it really starts to make sense why the two of us coming together is such a unique partnership that this mission couldn't really be achieved without each of our strengths.
That's great. Well, let me turn to Mohammed a second. IHUB is really a different kind of partnership. Rather than having one charter school system and one industry partner, you're really this kind of middle space where you were matchmaking between the private and the public sectors, between industry, research, and education. What are the strengths of that kind of model, and what kind of challenges does it bring?
So let me explain the model for a second. So our innovation work is a three-part strategy. First is how do we help districts get the money needed to implement technology. The first proof point we have is in the Eastside Junior High School District. We work with them in passing their ed tech bond, a bond they raised $118 million for technology that they will spend over the next 18 years. It's a first of its kind in California, very forward-thinking, very innovative that Eastside Union High School District did, and it's fascinating. One of their school board members is in the room as well. So that's one piece. And how do we get more districts the funding like that for technology in their districts so they don't have to raise it through philanthropic dollars for computers every 3 years or things like that. It's institutional support. The second piece of that is how do you help districts figure out their infrastructure? What I talked about earlier around 30 computers crashing the wireless infrastructure. So we work with a top-notch team of technology leaders in the Valley and with PwC and Mark and others to say, how do we provide the stack, the education stack for these districts to work together? This is the boring infrastructure part, the back office. How do these districts do that individually or in collaboration with other districts so they have the wires laid, if you will, so they can do work on top of that. And the third piece of that work is really around this middle space that, Barbara, you talked about around, on one side, we have great ed tech companies, some of them in the room, they're doing brilliant things and tackling the problem in various ways. On the other side, you have great school districts who are really adopting and adapting to technology, great leaders like Kathy, but they get a call once a day or an email once a day from these ed tech companies who say, boy, do I have the great product for you. And then how do they decipher through that as well? So us acting as the iHub model is really acting as a trusted advisor sitting in the middle with the goal of how do you increase adoption of technology in classrooms to increase student achievement. And the emphasis is back to the student achievement and how we get there. The way I say, what was said earlier is, if there's a classroom ranked of 30 kids, you rank them 1 to 30. Right now, without technology, we have 6 rows, 5 to a row, and that's the way it's been for our parents, our grandparents, and before that. But what is this personalized learning, and how is this going to really disrupt the classroom? And how do you get the person in the back to catch up? How do you keep the moving, and different types of adaptive learning and their learning styles? What can you do? So at the end of the day, the iHub is really playing a matchmaker in these two arenas where great ed tech companies who want to change the world with doing incredibly disruptive things. And on the other side, these great school districts who really want to adapt technology to scale. The challenges with that, Barbara, to your question, is really how do you make that happen? How do you make sure you get scale? How do you make sure you're not doing this with the early adopter teachers in every district, the 20 early adopters who are great, who love technology, who like to do this, but really have something that goes from a classroom to a school to a district? And how do you do that well?
Well, let me turn to Kathy a second and try to get the district perspective on this. So how was technology integration going in your district before you started working with iHub and the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, and how has that changed since?
So one of my fundamental beliefs is that the decision to use a particular product really needs to be made by the classroom teacher, the person who is closest to the students, closest to seeing what the need might be. So that said, there are a myriad of products out there, and they're available to teachers and principals readily, and they often go out and they find these solutions, they try them. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. The value that iHub brings to this process is the relationship, first of all, with the developer, who oftentimes comes into the classroom, sits down, talks with the teacher, gets the feedback, watches the students engage with the product, and then is able to make changes to it. And then the teacher being able to feel as if he or she has a real say in how that product evolves. And I think that's where the value has really come through with iHub.
So the chance to really make the products more classroom friendly, serve the purposes of education because they're actually being changed in the process of first being implemented in the classrooms you got. That's really exciting. And your kind of bottom-up approach to technology integration is completely compatible with working with iHub, it sounds like. It's not top-down mandate of particular uses of technology.
Exactly. iHub has been a great partner for us.
That's terrific. Well, another iHub partner is PwC, and I'll turn to Mark for a description of what you're doing with that, and it kind of gives you, I think, maybe a unique sense of what the, and you alluded to this earlier, the uneven technology infrastructure looks like in Silicon Valley today.
Absolutely. So, the reason why PwC got into this, there's three things. One, after the 2008 crash, we basically said we got to improve financial literacy. So that's where the journey started. And then we really wanted to make more use of it, leveraging our core capabilities. And one of them is technology. We got a deep understanding of technology. And one is around change, right? How do you change transformation? So that's how we start off the journey. And so Mohammed talked about the bond. What led up to that bond is to help them better understand how much they should raise is, well, what could technology do to drive improved student learning and improve the student outcome? And so we wrote a white paper around that with Silicon Valley Education Foundation. And the way we got to write this paper is the foundation introduced us to a lot of school districts that were across the nation adopting technology. We interviewed them, because if you just go look at, we also did an academic research paper and there was nothing on it yet, right? So it takes a while to get that out there. After the paper got written, what we did is we translated that knowledge into an assessment, and we've now assessed about 17 school districts in the Valley and about 10 outside the Valley. So that translates to about 80,000 students, 100 schools. What we found in that assessment is there's a big desire to drive change. There's a lack of understanding of how do you drive the change. And going back to technology is very easy to buy these days because you don't have to implement it. It's an app. You pay, and they all have a freemium model. So teacher could get it, try it, likes it, tries to get approval afterwards for funding it. So it's really not that hard to get into the classroom. So it's not the classic, let's go through a big implementation. However, it doesn't integrate across anything else that's part of the learning management system, and that's a big challenge, and that's hopefully technology providers will get that in place. What we quickly discovered, though, is that's happening by exception. So even though, districts have acquired technology, it's not pervasive. It's not pervasively used in any single classroom or teacher. They still have carts running around in the best case scenario from one classroom to another. So when I think about the workforce, where we have 4 devices to an individual, the school system is still basically, roughly speaking, at 1 device for 4 kids. So you can't pervasively change this leveraging technology yet because that takes some spending. I think the Common Core and the testing they had to do was there was a lot of funding that got into place to make sure that there's basic networking and wireless infrastructure in place. Now we get into the toughest hill to climb, which is like, let's say technology is available, is there. How do you drive wide use adoption? Even when you drive the wide use adoption, it doesn't mean you've drastically transformed the learning experience, right? So, there's a lot of steps you have to go through to get there. We got to be innovative, we got to be patient, we got to be supportive, and it will happen.
Great. Well, we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty about these challenges as we go forward. But first, I'd like to have you reflect a little bit on these partnerships almost as a cross-cultural experience. We have the culture of public education, and we have the culture of industry. And so let's start with the educators. I'll start with you, Diane. So my question is, as you moved from trying to do this internally to working with engineers from Facebook. What were some of the things you had to learn, maybe that were surprising, or that you felt that had to be ironed out so that you could be effective partners with each other?
I think that where we had to start was building trust with each other, and I think trust based on mutual respect. And so I think coming into this, educators have a lot of perceptions about for-profit and business. And I think lots of them are founded for good reasons. There's a lot of skepticism there. It feels like it's a very different mindset and approach and belief system. And so I think we had to really open our minds to what do we have in common here and what are our shared values and how can we get over sort of being skeptical of what your motivations might be and realize that they could be aligned. And I think there rightfully so are a lot of folks in business who sort of look at educators and education and say, what is wrong with you people? Why can't you get it together? You know, you're a disaster and you continue to be a disaster. Like, fix it. And there's some merit there too. And there is incredible complexity to the system that we are in. It is not like the for-profit sort of market-driven system, so it's not sort of a one-to-one. And so I think that there had to be some, undoing of beliefs on both sides and some building of trust and respect for one another. And that continues to this day. Much like any relationship, it requires ongoing work and ongoing development and ongoing investment to really understand each other, understand what each other know, respect each other's expertise, and then figure out how to bring all of that expertise to the table in a really collaborative set of work that is authentic and around something that you're doing together. And so that is what we work on every single day to make the partnership successful and to drive towards our common shared vision and mission.
How about you, Kathy?
So our situation is a little different because we, unlike Diane, are not working directly with the developer, and we have the foundation who serves as the mediary, if you will. And so they understand both worlds. They understand the business world, they understand the education world, and they're able to, behind the scenes, smooth out some of those places where conflict might exist. That said, with the classroom teacher and the developer, I have seen a good relationship in the classroom from that perspective. The developers that we've worked through iHub have been very open and receptive and really wanted to know how their product was performing in the classroom with real kids and a real teacher in a real learning environment.
I might, just since you mentioned Mohammed, I might just ask him, how often do you find yourself explaining industry people to educators or educators to, the constraints in education systems to industry? How much a part of your job is that?
Quite a bit, and it's more positive than it's broken on one side or the other. When we work with business leaders, I mean, we ask for their time, talent, and treasure. A lot of us start with treasure. If you write us a big enough check, we'll solve any problem you want solved, which is true, by the way. But I think that's almost the easy part. The hard part is really to work on the time and the talent. How do I get Mark to actually take time out of his busy schedule to come to a classroom and really understand and really use what his expertise are to help improve the challenge we're working on? Because this is not a single sector challenge. So we do need both sides of this equation to solve the problem. So the time and the talent is the hardest part to get from the business community. It's much easier to get the treasure. So really moving in that direction to say, invest the time to understand, invest the time to really get involved. What the education side has a challenge with is really around understanding how does this work? I mean, why the complications of technology? I mean, that's not what their core competency is. So for the business folks to understand how does the education system work, or what's the cycles, what are the constraints, and what are the student privacy issues, for instance. And those aren't just rich district versus poor district. Those are all parents. My twins just joined kindergarten, so now it's getting really serious.
Gotta fix it fast.
Exactly. It's all fun and games until it's your own kids, right? But really diving in that way. But on the other side, for the educators, I think their challenges, they have challenges as well that the business folks want to push, time to market, what are their constraints, and how do they change a culture? And Kathy has a great quote on that, but how do you change a culture? I have a hard time changing a culture in a 30% organization. Imagine an organization that has 10,000 kids. That's a company size of 10,000. There aren't very many companies in Silicon Valley that size, by the way. Rolling out a technology plan for all those, it's a pretty big endeavor. And then adopting the professional staff, the teachers, the educators to really use that. So I think what we've seen is once there's mutual respect on both sides, what the constraints are and where they live, we've seen a lot of advancement.
So, Mark, can you make this personal for us, kind of from your personal experience? Did you have to learn things or have some surprises when you started trying to work with the education sector?
Yeah, absolutely. There were a lot of surprises. Look, everybody likes to use the analogy of the corporate world being so successful. What they don't realize is most businesses fail and disappear. We can't afford that with our schools and students. So there's a reason why one system is more rigid and changes slower. Because it's if you experiment with it, you're experimenting at the expense of students. One of my biggest learnings. So I used to work in venture philanthropy, and before that, and my role was to help school systems drive change. So that was my first experience. And then here in the Valley, before we started this journey on the writing the paper, I was volunteering and doing some math coaching on the East Side. And that's why, that's very valuable because there's this perception that, it's all about the teachers. Well, yeah, it is all about the teachers, but it's not because the teachers don't want to do it. Teachers didn't go to school studying how to deploy technology in a classroom. They went to school studying how to educate kids, and they do that incredibly well. But they only get 2 days a year of development, and that development is not even the right development. It's good for other things, but it's not for what we're talking about here. So if you think about we're the biggest lever we have and the biggest asset we have that we got to build upon and empower, it's the teachers. So what I've learned is one, you got to work on how to help the teachers, not criticize the teachers. That's number one. Number two, earning the trust. We were in it, honestly, purely for the good. We don't make any money out of this. It's my people are very passionate. I got a team of 15 people that volunteer on this, and they do it night times and weekends, and they're extremely passionate. But when you first knock on the door of a superintendent, they're like, well, I got many things to worry about. Well, what is this about? And then I think they hear from each other, right? And they realize, okay, maybe this is going to help me. Let's give it a try. And that's where the Silicon Foundation plays a really key role because they are a translation layer, right? So they understand how we think. They understand how they think. A lot of them have deep backgrounds in the education system. So their relationship, their trust, and their knowledge has been very helpful to earn the trust of the school system leaders and help them. Because when I said we did 17 assessment, it took us 1 year to do the first 2. And by the way, each assessment takes like 5 to 10 hours. But we reached out to a ton all over California, and nobody would respond. Once through the East Side High, the different superintendents started talking together. Then they're like, okay, we get it. We understand the value. Let's go ahead and do it. And before you know it, I think we did 7 out of the 8, Mohammed, just in the East Side Alliance. And then right now we've got like 10 ready to go in the coming few months. And is it 52 districts between San Francisco and Gilroy? So on a roll.
You are. Well, let me take the question then to Mike about what did you learn things about working with educators or something about that surprised you as part of this work?
So I definitely agree with and reemphasize everything that Diane was saying about really growing to understand and trust and respect each other and the different experiences and background and skills that each of us bring into this partnership. That's absolutely a critical foundation of all of our work. Now, there's this interesting thing where you kind of paint this picture of our team, and now we have about 25 people among engineers and product managers and designers working on our team. And each of them came into this initiative because they were very passionate about working in education. There's a number of different projects that they could do at Facebook, or many of them even considered leaving Facebook to work in directly in education at other companies. And the idea of being able to work and support education really resonated strongly with them. But one of the things that every one of them had to get past was their own experience in K-12 schools, and realize that what actually worked really well for them as they got advanced degrees in computer science and business and design and are now working at Facebook isn't working for a very large number of people throughout the country. And in order to be able to support the needs of those kids, you can't view this through the lens of your own perspective of what school is. You have to open up your mind and really empathize and understand the different challenges that people and especially underserved people face throughout the country. And the other interesting thing is that I think many of the folks on my team would naturally be inclined to use the lens of technology as the way to try and solve this problem. How can we build the tool that students are going to use to direct their own learning? And acknowledging that the tool is only one part of this learning environment that we're working to create. And it needs to fit into this full change and ecosystem where the role of a learner will shift and the role of a teacher will shift, and all of the different supports that allow for this, including the curriculum, the professional development and teacher training to support that change in mindset, the improvement science that goes into how we are going to be supporting these different needs that each learner has, and what are the targeted interventions, and all of the different ways that the students experience with each of their teachers and their parents is going to be connected, is not something that you can just write some code and solve the problem. It really requires each of our strengths to come together and produce some solutions that are holistic.
That's really interesting. So I'm hearing a couple of things from here. I'm hearing mutual respect is really important, and kind of abandoning stereotypes you might have about somebody from the other sector. Earlier, Mike and Diane mentioned being on the phone at 5 a.m. together this morning, so I think sometimes people from industry think, oh, teachers have such an easy
Not the
schedule.
phone, it's all messaging and we're not.
Oh, I'm so out of it, yeah. All right, they were messaging at 5 a.m. this morning. But my point was, sometimes I think people in industry think, oh, the hours are so easy in education. You only work from 8:30 to 3 and then you're off. And they don't really see what happens behind the scenes. And I think you learn that being in the classroom, messaging with somebody like Diane or Kathy at all hours of the day or night and all days of the week. And then the other part is the systems perspective. So it's not just the technology, that you really have to look at the whole system. So I think those are two really important things that came out of this discussion. And we obviously have some vibrant partnerships here. And clearly we're in a wonderful place. I mean, Silicon Valley has a lot of the technology talent, the creativity. We're seeing an interest in philanthropy and education. We also have many strong, hardworking education institutions, and the option to bring them together in near proximity to each other physically as well as electronically. But we all know scaling is one of the hardest things. As hard as it is to have a partnership like Summit and Facebook have, how do you make it bigger? And I know that's what Silicon Valley Education Foundation is trying to do, Mohammed. Can you talk a little bit about how you address that problem of trying to scale some of these good partnerships across a whole region?
So in Silicon Valley, it's back to 450,000 kids, 52 school districts. So there's only a couple there's literally 3 organizations that are for-profit that sell into all these districts, and beyond in California, there's 1,100 school districts, and none of those 3 are in the room right now. So a few things I would recommend. One is, one of our board members, Mike Kirsch, who's in the other room, has always said, is make new money glue money. I mean, the talent is in this room literally right now. You've got Max at Boys and Girls Club. You've got a bunch of folks in the room. How do you glue a lot of this work together to really scale? And how do you work together versus independently? I think that's one of the challenges. The second challenge I see is this whole idea of second to market. We all try to build, if we need a solution, we try to build it ourselves. More likely than not, it already exists. How do you bring it in? How do you scale it within your organization? And having something that's fully built and implementing it is pretty hard still, but it's a lot easier than building it from scratch. And we're not, as I always joke in my own organization, we're not as unique as we think we are, that we need the amount of customization. A lot of times there's a lot of great tools that exist. How do you bring them in and really scale those endeavors? And thirdly, I'd say is really how do we build networks of these communities in these districts? A great example of that is the East Side Alliance, which Kathy is a co-chair of. Now, think about that. East Side Junior High School District, 7 K-8 feeders. That's 86,540 kids. That's larger than Oakland and San Francisco combined. That would be the 3rd largest district in California, but no one gets that. And by the way, superintendents turn over every 3 years, so there's a lot of turnover there as well. How do you glue these networks together to think about kids in K-12? It's an outstanding statewide example. The Gates Foundation, others have looked at this example as an outstanding example of how they're thinking about scale, how they're thinking about data across districts, as one example, how they're thinking about implementing tools across districts so students don't have different experiences. Good example of a challenge is what we realized, we're doing some math trainings of 8th and 9th graders, and we realized that the 8th grade teachers were leaving the kids here and the 9th grade teachers were picking them up over here. How do you align that? And the way these networks work together, the East Side Alliance, and there's a few other in the Valley as well that we're working on, is really to say, how do we get to scale? How do we think about technology as a whole in multiple districts? And then on the other side, the education technology, ed tech companies, when we think about adoption, if I have a great ed tech company and I implement it in my kid's school, that doesn't mean it works. And how do you actually use evidence in decisions? And that's where the great evaluation community comes in, and them adapting to how you think about scale and technology, because scale and technology isn't a double-blind study 5 years from now, because the product will have changed 75 times a year, and it'll evolve. So how do you do rapid testing? How do you really keep up with the needs of the times to make sure, A, we're focused on student success, but B, we're doing this at scale, we're doing it at a price point that works, and we're working on the culture to really, really adapt back to 450,000 students, 52 districts. How do you bring them all together? The good news is, I think with Common Core and a few other statewide changes that are happening, there's promise, and I think there's hope.
Thank you. As someone who comes from a world where what my center does is actually evaluation of learning technologies, I just want to emphasize that point that you talked about. Scaling is really important, but we need to know that we're scaling things that can be effective. And we not only need to know that they can be effective somewhere, but we need to understand how to make them effective. And so one of the things we've found is as we've brought more traditional research methods that are fine for telling you 3 years later whether a particular very specific kind of intervention, does it work or does it not work, is it good or is it bad, that doesn't really work with the kind of technology-supported dramatic change in learning environments that you're talking about in some place like Summit Public Schools. When you're really talking about the way teaching and learning takes place, and technology is one piece of this more complex system, you've got to study that whole system, and you need to do it more quickly because both the model and the technology are changing, and you need to do it in a kind of partnership with the people who are implementing it and the technology developers that we really don't see in very many traditional evaluations of the kind that get into academic journals or the What Works Clearinghouse. So that's really something our center has taken on as a challenge, is how do you work with rapidly changing technologies? How do you work in extended partnerships with schools in cycles of improvement where you're actually measuring near-term outcomes so you can make improvements rather than waiting 3 years and saying, oh, it's too bad, it didn't work. And I see...
Barbara, can I just add something to that? I mean, a lot of people talk about what makes Silicon Valley technology community tick, and why does everyone it's the envy of the world, right? Everyone comes here to see that. And what people don't realize is in Silicon Valley, we have those opportunities as well. I mean, SRI lives in Silicon Valley. So the partnerships, back to the theme, is these partnerships if we really want to focus on adoption and student success, there's lots of partners that are up the street that we need to leverage.
Absolutely, yeah. And I see Diane nodding. Full disclosure, SRI and Summit schools have worked together.
And you're being very modest about being a leader in this area and direction. It's a powerful partnership.
Well, thank you very much. So I know we're coming to the closing minutes, and I want to hear from Diane and the rest of you about what you see as coming next here. What are some of the unmet challenges that you're really hoping to address in the next few years?
Yeah. So that's a big question. I'm trying to decide which direction to go. You know, I think that I think I'll build off what we were just talking about, which is this is phenomenally important work and an important strategy. Everyone in education needs to be engaged in this work right now, and everyone needs to be implementing technology and moving towards student outcomes and directing our efforts towards figuring out what works for kids and then doing more of that. And I do believe we need a parallel strategy occurring, and certainly this is the world that we try to live in, which is how do you create from scratch an idealized new system, literally, that doesn't have to contend with all of the existing barriers and policies and structures and issues, but can actually reimagine what we want to do in the future and design it from scratch and build the whole system. And I think it's really important to have both of those efforts going on at the same time. I hope that we're offering a vision of what is possible in a holistic way and really testing and pushing the field, and at the same time staying really grounded with the fact that, you know, the vast majority of kids aren't in our schools right now, and we have some policy freedoms and things like that we're working in. And so, you know, I think that's both of those efforts need to persist, and we need to be, the theme of this panel, collaborating across them so that we are making the most of both of those.
So yesterday, the SBAC scores for statewide came out, and two pieces. Over the years, when we look at Silicon Valley, we do, in our subgroups, we do really well relative to the state, except in the achievement gap with Hispanic students. We do worse than the rest of the state. And I think that's not the Silicon Valley we want to be in. If we think about the two Silicon Valleys, that's not the Silicon Valley we want to be in. And the scores came out yesterday, and the good news is we're doing better. The great news is in Kathy's district and in this Eastside Alliance, that's the first time I've actually seen the achievement gap actually closing. What we saw in the past was, you know, Hispanic students' numbers went up by 4 points, but also the other group went up by 4 points as well. So they both did well, but the gap didn't close. What we saw for the first time was that the Hispanic students jumped by 7 points. So the gap was literally closing, which was greater than the top line. So it is closing, and I think so that's very promising, but the challenge still is, that's a nasty blemish on the Silicon Valley that we live in, and how do we leverage what we're talking about here? And this is not about you know, charter schools versus traditional public schools. They're all students, they're all that we need to work on, but how do we use technology to tackle that issue. And I'll bet there's a lot of people in this room who can help with that challenge in various ways. And I think technology is a key lever that can address that. But to date, we haven't done a very good job.
Other thoughts? Kathy? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's embarrassing that we have this right in our backyard when we're actually transforming the world out of this epicenter. So it's unfortunate, and there's good energy behind it. We got to build on that energy. It's changeable. I mean, I think, Barbara, I love what you said is evaluation, continuous improvement is key, but it's not to question whether we need it or not. It's more to drive how to implement it better, how to make better use of it. Because 120 years ago, they debated whether books were beneficial to students or not, right? So, I mean, that's the equivalent today of debating around technology. So it shouldn't be a debate. It should rather be how do we accelerate and make sure it drives the right student outcome. I mean, there's no denying that better education leads to better standard of living and a lot of other benefits to broader society.
I think we have a comment.
Maybe time for a question, I don't know, but I just want to, I really appreciate all these efforts to bring technology in the classroom. One thing that strikes me, though, is in our valley, a third of our kids go to bed hungry every night, and we know that a hungry child just cannot learn, no matter how much devices you put in the classroom and Wi-Fi it. So the question I'm throwing out there, is there any way to use our technology to address so our children don't arrive at school just hungry, and they can't even think, even with all this wonderful improvement you're doing with the devices and Wi-Fi, how can we use technology to even address our children not arriving? 1/3 of them are arriving hungry, and your stomach hurts, you can't think. So that was just, how can we use technology to even address so a child can arrive in the classroom and be able to learn with these great devices and Wi-Fi and all that?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that question. But I do know that over 50% of the kids in California live in poverty, and that is an appalling figure. And the problems are very, very deep, and it's going to take all of us working together to come up with a solution.
I would love to see tech. They're just so innovative and creative. How can we hit that piece of the student learning?
So any particular neighborhood, right, that has these kinds of kids could have 50 to 100 nonprofits, right? And there is some technology in place to how to help them collaborate. I know some neighborhoods have tried that, but think about it. 50 organizations trying to do 50 different things in silos. The basic collaboration around who's working on what and how to coordinate could drive major benefits. So yeah, that you could definitely leverage technology for that.
I am really sorry. I see we have come to the end of our time. We have some wonderful questions here. There is a little bit of a break. I'm going to ask you to come up and ask. I see those hands, and I really apologize. We ran out of time. This was such an interesting panel. Please join me in thanking the panelists. And then those with questions, come on up, and we'll do that.